The first thing I noticed about my husband was that he laughed too easily. Not the controlled, measured laughter of a diplomat who had been trained to put people at ease. Not the short, polite sounds that courtiers made when they wanted to seem warm. Ethan Cole laughed the way children laugh when something surprises them. Fully, openly, without thinking about who was watching. He had been in my palace for exactly 6 minutes when he did it the first time. One of my attendants had tripped on the hem of her ceremonial robe and grabbed a flower arrangement to steady herself. Petals went everywhere. Every dignitary in the receiving hall held their breath. Ethan laughed, stepped forward, helped her to her feet, and said something quietly that made her laugh too. My senior advisor, Wren, leaned close to my ear. "He is not what I expected," she said. I kept my face still. "No," I agreed. "He is not. I am Velara Tishari, first princess of the conclave, heir to the 6th throne, daughter of a line that had ruled the Velshari for 400 years. I had been trained since the age of 5 to read people, their intentions, their fears, the small, careful distances they kept between their true selves and the faces they showed the world. It was not vanity to say I was good at it. It was simply fact. And Ethan Cole was the most confusing person I had ever stood in the same room with. He was tall for a human, which meant he was average height by Velshari standards. He had dark hair that was slightly too long, as if he kept forgetting to cut it. His eyes were a shade of brown that my people would call earth-colored, which is not a compliment in our language but should have been. He wore his formal diplomatic clothes the way a man wears a suit borrowed from someone else. Grateful for it, uncomfortable in it, clearly counting the minutes until he could take it off. He had no weapons, not ceremonial ones, not hidden ones. My security team had checked 3 times because they could not believe it either. He carried nothing, my head of security, Commander Velis, told me later that evening. Not even a blade. Most diplomats carry at least a blade. "He is not a diplomat," I said. "He is my husband." The treaty had been signed 8 months before I ever saw his face. The Velshari conclave and the human homeworld, Earth, had reached the end of a 2-year negotiation that had started, like most negotiations, because of a problem neither side could solve alone. The Keth Syndicate had been expanding through the outer ring systems for a decade, disrupting trade routes, occupying neutral stations, quietly making the edges of known space very dangerous for anyone without a fleet. The Conclave had the fleet. Earth had something the Conclave did not fully understand yet, which was classified in the treaty documents under the phrase, strategic resource capability. The alliance made sense. The marriage was a symbol of it. I had agreed because I understood the politics. A princess of the 6th throne marrying a representative of humanity said something to the rest of the conclave that speeches and signed documents could not. It said, "We trust them." It said, "We are bound." It said, "Whatever you think of humans, think again." What I had not expected was that the human they sent would be so thoroughly, almost aggressively, ordinary. He asked about the gardens on his first full day. Not the strategy rooms, not the communication arrays, not the fleet schedules, the gardens. He walked through them for 2 hours with a quiet delight that I found difficult to watch without feeling something strange, something I did not have a ready word for. He crouched beside a low-growing plant with silver leaves and asked my head groundskeeper, an elderly woman named Bera, what it was called and whether it preferred shade. They talked for 20 minutes. Bera adored him immediately. He fixed things. This was the other habit I noticed in the first week. He did not call for a technician when something in our quarters stopped working. He simply looked at it for a moment, as if deciding whether it was worth his time, and then fixed it. The atmospheric regulator in the East Wing had been making a low hum for 3 years that no one had been able to correct. Ethan took it apart with his hands on the 4th morning, spent an hour with it, and put it back together in silence. The hum was gone. "Where did you learn that?" I asked. He looked up at me. "My father," he said. "He believed in fixing things yourself if you could." "What did your father do?" He paused. Not long, just a breath. "He kept things running," Ethan said, and then he smiled, and the pause was gone, and I almost forgot it had happened. I began keeping a private record, not because I suspected him of anything exactly, more because I was a princess trained in intelligence, and something about Ethan Cole made a quiet alarm ring in the back of my mind. Not the kind that meant danger, but the kind that meant pay attention. Something is not what it appears to be. The scars were the first thing I wrote down. He had too many. Not dramatically. Not the kind of scarring that announces a violent history. But if you knew what to look for, and I did, you could see them. A faint line along his left forearm. Something at the base of his right shoulder that could have been an old surgical repair. A small, faded mark just beneath his jaw on the left side, which my medical advisor said, when I described it, sounded like the result of close contact energy discharge. Velshari soldiers came back from combat with marks like that sometimes. Ethan Cole had the body of a man who had been in situations that most people did not survive, and he wore it the way he wore his borrowed diplomatic clothes, quietly, without making it anyone else's business. The second thing I wrote down was the nightmares. I did not know about them at first because I did not sleep near him for the first 2 weeks. Custom and my own caution kept us in separate chambers until the formal bonding ceremony was complete. But on the third week, the night after the ceremony, I woke at what my people call the still hour, which is the deep middle of the night, when even the palace sounds go quiet, and I heard him. Not loudly, not the way that would have brought guards running, just a low, tense sound, and then silence, and then the careful, controlled breathing of a man making himself calm down by force. In the morning he made tea and asked me how I liked my eggs, and never mentioned it. I did not mention it either. I wrote it down. The third thing, the thing that made the alarm ring louder, happened at the end of my first month married to him. A reception for the outer ring trade delegates. 40 guests, formal attire, the long kind of evening that exists to give powerful people the chance to say things to each other that they cannot say in official meetings. Ethan stood beside me for the first hour. Perfectly pleasant, perfectly unremarkable. He made a joke about human food customs that made the Delhari ambassador laugh. He admired the ambassador's ceremonial pin with what seemed like genuine interest. And then the Keth trade envoy walked in. His name was Dovin. He was one of the syndicate's public faces. Smooth, expensive, the kind of man who had never needed to be dangerous himself, because he had always had other people to be dangerous for him. He had attended 6 conclave events in the past year. I had spoken to him twice. He was unpleasant but careful. He saw Ethan before Ethan saw him. I caught it because I was watching the room, which is what I always did at events like this. Dovin went still, not the stillness of someone who is surprised, the stillness of someone who is afraid and trying very hard not to show it. Then Ethan turned, and they were looking at each other across the reception hall. Dovin left 11 minutes later. He claimed illness. I noted the time in my mind and added it to my private record later that night. Ethan, beside me, took a calm sip of the drink he had been holding for an hour. "Lovely party," he said. I looked at him. He looked back at me, steady and warm and completely unreadable. "Yes," I said. "Lovely." That night I wrote the last entry of the first month. I kept it short. I wrote, "I married a man I believed to be harmless. I am no longer certain what I believe. What I am certain of is this. Whatever Ethan Cole is, or was, or has chosen to become, he has decided that I am something worth protecting. I can feel it in the way he stands, always slightly between me and the door, always knowing where the exits are, always watching, behind the warm eyes and the easy laugh, with something older and quieter, and far more dangerous than anything I have seen in my own court. I do not know yet whether to be unsettled by this. I think I should probably be grateful. The second month of my marriage began with a letter, not a transmission, not a digital signal routed through the conclave's communication arrays. An actual letter, written on physical paper, the kind that humans called dead world paper, pressed from plant fibers, the kind that could not be intercepted by any system in my palace, because no system in my palace was designed to watch for it. It had been slid under the door of our private quarters sometime in the deep hours of the night. The attendant who found it at dawn brought it directly to me. I looked at the writing. I did not recognize the language. The characters were angular, compact, built for speed rather than beauty. I photographed it and sent the image to the conclave's archive division with a priority request. They came back to me in 4 hours with an answer I did not expect. Unknown origin, the archivist told me over secure channel. We can identify the script family. It belongs to a human dialect group that existed during what their history calls the Contact Decade, the first 10 years after Earth made connection with the Conclave. Most of these dialects were used in field operations, operative communications, things that were not meant to be stored or read by anyone outside a specific group. We have fragments in our deepest archive files, but this appears to be active. Someone used this today, someone who still knows how. I sat with that for a long time. Then I heard Ethan moving in the kitchen, the quiet sounds of him making the morning tea he always made, and I folded the photographed image away and went to join him as if nothing had happened. He handed me a cup. I took it. I watched him. He looked back at me with his usual morning expression, which was a kind of calm, rested openness that I had come to recognize as his natural state, the face of a man who woke without fear, who went through his mornings the same way he went through everything else, without hurry and without waste. I said, "Someone left a letter under our door last night." He did not react, not in any visible way. He lifted his own cup, took a slow sip and said, "I saw it. You saw it." I took it when I woke up early, around the 3rd hour. He set his cup down. "I handled it." "You handled it," I said. "Yes." I waited. He did not add anything. I looked at him across the table, this man who fixed broken machinery with his hands, and laughed at flower arrangements and grew things in my garden, and apparently woke at the 3rd hour of the night to collect secret letters written in operative dialects that had not been used in over a decade, and handled them. "What did it say?" I asked. "Nothing that concerns you," he said. And then, before I could respond to that, he smiled, the genuine one, the one that went all the way to his eyes, and added, "I mean that as reassurance, Vel, not as dismissal." I did not feel reassured. I felt the very specific frustration of a woman who was used to knowing everything that happened in her own palace, married to a man who was clearly operating on a level of information and intention that she could not yet see. I set my cup down. I said, "Ethan, I am the first princess of the conclave. I command one of the largest intelligence services in known space. If you need to keep something from me for reasons of safety, I understand that, but I need you to tell me that. I need you to tell me there is a level to this that I am not seeing, so that I can adjust." He was quiet for a moment, then he said, "There is a level to this that you are not seeing. How dangerous is it?" Another pause, shorter this time. "Not to you," he said. "I am making sure of that." I believed him. That was the strange part. I believed him completely, and I had no clear reason why, except that Ethan Cole had never once in the weeks I had known him said something he did not mean. 2 days later, the second letter arrived. This one was not slid under the door. It was placed inside my private archive room, which required biometric access and a rotating key code that changed every 12 hours. My security team ran a complete sweep and found nothing. No sign of forced entry. No trace of any person who should not have been there. Whatever method had been used to get inside that room was beyond our current detection capability. Commander Velis was furious. She came to me within the hour, her blue-gray face set hard, and told me that no known species had the technology to bypass the archive room's security without leaving a trace. Which means, she said, either we are dealing with something entirely new, or we are dealing with something very old that we have simply never encountered. I asked her if she had informed Ethan. She hesitated. "He was already there," she said. "When my team arrived, he was standing in the center of the room, reading the letter. He told my team to sweep the perimeter, but not to touch the letter. And when they asked him on whose authority, he said yours. I had not given him that authority. He had assumed it, correctly, because he had known exactly what the letter was, and exactly what should be done about it, and my authority was the fastest way to make sure it happened. I could not even be irritated about it. It was the right call. I went to the archive room. Ethan was still there. The letter was on the central table. He had set it down without folding it, which told me he had already read it more than once. I looked at it. This one was written in standard conclave script, clear, deliberate, as if the sender had wanted to make absolutely sure I could read it if I found it. It said, "Tell your husband that we remember what he did in the Soval system. We have not forgotten. He will hear from us soon." I set the letter back down. I looked at Ethan. "The Soval system," I said. He was looking at the window. The gardens were visible beyond it, the silver-leafed plants moving softly in the morning air. He watched them for a moment before he turned back to me. "That was a long time ago," he said. "What happened there?" He looked at me for a long moment. I could see something working behind his eyes. Not the calculation of a man deciding what to hide, but the harder work of a man deciding how much truth was kind to give. "There is a difference, and I know what it looks like. I stopped something from getting worse," he finally said. "Some people did not want it stopped." "Who are they?" I asked. "The people sending these letters." "Keth," he said simply. "Not the public side of it, the part underneath." I had known that name since before I could read. The Keth Syndicate, the most powerful criminal and political network in the outer ring systems. They did not fight wars openly. They moved resources, controlled access, made themselves necessary until the day they became impossible to remove, without tearing open the system around them. "Why are they coming after you now?" I asked. "Why here? Why in my palace?" He turned back to the window. "Because I'm here," he said, "and because here is where they can reach me. I spent 11 years being somewhere they could not reach. And now?" He turned back to me. His expression was something I had not seen on him before. Not quite regret, not quite resignation. Something in between, worn quietly, like those old scars. "Now I am a husband," he said, "which means I am in one place, which means I can be found." I understood then what he was telling me without saying it directly. He had chosen this. Chose me. Chose the palace. Chose the garden and the morning tea, and the laughing at flower arrangements. And that choice had a cost that was now beginning to arrive in the form of letters from people who had very long memories. "Should I be afraid?" I asked. He shook his head. "No," he said. "Never." The third letter did not come by paper. It came in person. The Keth envoy who requested a private audience was not Dovin. Dovin had not returned after the reception. This was a woman named Callis, senior, polished, the kind of person who carries rank the way some people carry weapons. She requested to meet with Ethan privately, and my protocol staff brought the request to me, because it was unusual, and they were not sure how to file it. It was addressed to him, not to me, which was an insult by conclave standards, and everyone in my office was watching to see how I would respond. I told them to approve the meeting, and I watched it on the security feed. They sat across a table in a small reception room. Callis spoke for the first 7 minutes. I could not hear the sound. The room was shielded from audio surveillance, which she had clearly known, but I could read the shape of the conversation. She was laying out terms. Her posture said so. The slight forward lean, the careful gestures, the occasional pause where she waited for him to respond. She was offering something and explaining the conditions. Ethan sat back in his chair and let her talk. He was completely still in a way I was starting to recognize. Not passive stillness, not patience, calculation. The stillness of a man who already knows what the answer is going to be and is waiting for the other person to finish before he gives it. When she stopped talking, he leaned forward. He spoke for about 90 seconds. I watched Callis's face change. Slowly, the way faces change when someone says something that adjusts the reality of the room. By the time he finished, she was sitting straighter. The terms-laying posture was gone. She nodded once, stood, and left. The whole meeting lasted 11 minutes. Ethan came back to our quarters. He had a small cut on his right hand, near the knuckles. He went to the washroom, ran water over it, wrapped it in a cloth, and came to sit beside me in the main room without any explanation. I said, "You have a cut." "I know," he said. "How?" He looked at the wrapped hand as if thinking about it. "She brought someone with her," he said. "Outside the room. They made a choice and it did not work out for them." "Is that person?" "In conclave medical care," he said, unhurt beyond what was necessary. I looked at my husband. 11 minutes in a shielded room, and he had concluded a conversation, resolved a physical confrontation, and returned without looking ruffled. He was sitting in the chair he always sat in the same easy way he always sat. And if you had walked in off the street and seen him, you would have guessed that he had just come back from the garden. "Ethan," I said, and something in my voice made him look at me differently. Not the usual warmth, not the careful management. He looked at me the way he had looked at Callis through the last 90 seconds of that meeting. Directly, fully, without evasion. "I know," he said quietly. You deserve more than what I've been giving you. I'm not asking for apologies, I said. I am asking for honesty. He was quiet for a moment. Then, I will tell you everything. Soon, when I know how much of it is safe for you to know. I said, I decide what is safe for me. He almost smiled at that, not the easy laugh smile, a different one, something that looked like recognition and respect, and a lot of complicated feeling held very still. Yes, he said, you do. Give me a little more time. I gave him the time. I sat beside him, and we were quiet together. And outside the window the silver-leafed plants moved in the dark air, and I thought, I am the most powerful woman in this region of space, and I am sitting here waiting for my husband to decide I can handle the truth about him. And the strangest part was, I trusted him enough to wait. That night I updated my private record. I had been writing in it every few days since we married. Tonight I wrote more than usual. He is not what the conclave thinks he is. He is not what I thought he was. He is not dangerous in the way that generals are dangerous, or the way that power is dangerous. He is dangerous the way that precision is dangerous. Quietly, without announcement, in a way that only becomes clear when you watch what happens when someone miscalculates around him. And underneath all of it, underneath whatever he was, and whatever he did, and whatever the Keth Syndicate is afraid of when they think of him, there is a man who gets up early to collect threatening letters before I can find them and worry. There is a man who checks the exits in every room, without knowing he is doing it. There is a man who chose a garden over whatever he used to be, and who is fighting very hard to stay chosen. I do not know yet what his past holds. I know it is heavy. I know it has left marks on him that are not only on his skin. What I know more than anything, reading back through these weeks of notes and observations and quiet alarms, is this. Ethan Cole made a decision when he married me. He decided that whatever came through the door, whatever old name followed him from old places, it would not reach me. He has organized his entire presence in my life around that decision. The letters are going to keep coming. Callis and Dovin and whoever they send next, they are going to keep coming. And my husband is going to keep being exactly as harmless as he chooses to be. Which, I was beginning to understand, was not very harmless at all. They came at the rise of the third moon. I woke to silence, and the silence was wrong. The palace at night had a sound, the low rhythm of the environmental systems, the soft automated sweeps of the security arrays, the distant background hum of a building that was never completely still. I had slept inside that sound for years. My body knew it the way lungs know the rhythm of breathing. When it changed, even slightly, I came awake without needing to decide to. The sound had not disappeared, it had shifted. The security arrays had stopped their sweeping cycle. The automated door systems on the east corridor had gone quiet in the specific way they went quiet when they were being actively suppressed, not simply inactive. I lay still for 3 seconds, reading it with the part of my mind that never fully slept. And then I reached across the bed. Ethan was not there. The sheets on his side were cool. He had been gone for more than a few minutes. I sat up slowly, listening. Nothing from the rooms adjacent to ours. Nothing from the main corridor outside. A silence that was too complete, too clean. The kind of silence that was itself a kind of signal. I got up, moved to the wall panel, and pulled up the palace security feed on silent display. What I saw made me stop breathing for exactly 2 seconds. The East Wing corridor monitors were offline, all 12 of them in a sequence that moved from the outer gate inward, which meant someone had entered and suppressed the cameras as they came, not from a central switch but manually, one by one, which meant they knew where each camera was, which meant they had either excellent intelligence or they had been inside this building before. I counted the gaps in the feed, 12 cameras. Based on the timing of the outages, they had moved through the corridor in under 4 minutes. I did not know how many of them there were yet. I was about to find out. The feed from the courtyard camera, which was on a separate system and had not been touched, showed me the outer gate. The lock had been overridden, not broken, overridden, which required a code. Someone had the access code for my east gate, which was a code that only 7 people in this palace possessed. And one of those 7 people was currently missing from my bed in the middle of the night. I pressed my back against the wall and made myself think instead of react. I was a princess. I had been in danger before. I had been trained for it. I had a personal emergency signal in the inner ring of my bracelet. I could press it now and have armed guards in this corridor in under 60 seconds. I did not press it yet, because I was watching the courtyard camera, and I had just seen something that changed the calculation. There was a shape in the deep shadow near the garden wall, not moving toward the palace, moving along its edge, staying close to the stonework, moving with an economy of motion that was almost invisible. You would miss it if you were not specifically looking for the negative space where someone had learned to disappear into architecture. I had spent enough time watching Ethan navigate rooms to know the way he moved. I knew the proportion of his shoulders, the particular angle he carried his head when he was alert. It was him. He was already out there. I watched. For the next 4 minutes I did not breathe properly. What happened in that courtyard was not combat in any way that I had a framework for. I had attended military reviews. I had watched training exercises conducted by the best-trained forces in the conclave. I had seen my own security team run live scenario drills. What happened in my courtyard with Ethan and the 12 people who had come through my east gate was not like any of that. It was methodical. That was the only word I could find while I watched. Not fierce, not dramatic. Methodical. The way you would approach a problem that you had solved many times before and knew exactly how to finish. He moved through them in a sequence that seemed almost gentle at first. A redirect here, a controlled fall there. And it was only when I forced myself to count that I realized how fast he was working and how completely, because within those 4 minutes, 3 figures were down in the first section of the courtyard, and then he was in the second section, and then he was in the third. He used the garden, the low walls, the raised planting beds, the water feature, the paths between them. He used all of it, as if he had walked through that space every morning for weeks, specifically, in order to know it the way he needed to know it now, which he had. He had spent hours in that garden. I had thought it was because he liked plants. He had been mapping a perimeter. By the time he reached the leader, I knew it was the leader because this person had stayed back while the others moved forward, which is what leaders do. Most of the others were either down or retreating toward the outer gate. The leader held position. They were large, armored in Keth field mesh, carrying a suppressor rod, which was the kind of weapon that could put a full-grown Velshari soldier on the ground for 8 hours. They raised it. Ethan was already not where it was aimed. What happened in the next 40 seconds I cannot fully describe, because I do not have the technical vocabulary for it, and I was watching on a grainy low-light courtyard camera, with my heart doing something medically questionable in my chest. What I can tell you is that the suppressor rod ended up on the stone ground about 4 meters from where it started, and the Keth leader ended up seated against the garden's outer wall, with both arms restrained behind them using what appeared to be a length of irrigation cable that Ethan had pulled from the garden bed beside him. Then Ethan crouched down in front of the seated figure. I could not hear what was said. I watched the body language. The leader said something. I could see the movement of the head, the angry set of the jaw. Ethan was very still. He tilted his head slightly, the way he tilted his head when he was genuinely curious about something. The leader said something else. Ethan responded. It was short, 15 words at most. The leader went quiet. Whatever Ethan had said, it had landed somewhere very specific and very final. Ethan stood. He turned toward the palace. He looked up, directly at the courtyard camera, as if he had always known I was watching. I was already moving to the door. I met him at the east corridor entrance. He was not breathing hard, or if he was, he had already controlled it back to normal, which somehow made it worse. He had a few marks on him that had not been there before, a split at his lower lip, something that was going to bruise on his left forearm by morning. He was carrying his shoes in one hand. He had gone out in bare feet, which I could not think about too carefully, or I would lose the careful composure I was holding on to with both hands. He stopped when he saw me. For a fraction of a second, something passed across his face that I had never seen before. Not the calm, not the warmth, not the easy smile. Something colder and deeper and very old, like a door held open for just a moment before it closes. And then it closed, and he looked at me with the brown earth-colored eyes that I had been watching for 2 months, and they were his eyes again, my husband's eyes, and he said, in a voice that was soft and completely steady, "Are you hurt?" I said, "No." Are you? He looked down at the split on his lip as if checking an inventory. No, he said. There are 12 of them, I said. 11, he said. One went back over the wall about 3 minutes in. I let one go. I stared at him. Because they were the youngest, he said, simply, as if this explained everything. And somehow it did. And somehow that was the detail that undid me more than anything else I had just watched. That in the middle of whatever he had just done, in whatever state he had been in, he had looked at someone and decided they were too young to be part of the consequence. Commander Velis arrived with the security team 4 minutes later. They moved efficiently through the courtyard, securing the figures Ethan had left. Velis came to stand before us and looked at Ethan with an expression I had never seen her turn on anyone. Something between professional respect and personal unease. The one at the wall, Ethan said to her, before she could speak. He will have recordings, physical recordings, not digital, coded in a way that will look like maintenance logs. You will want to find those. Velis looked at him for a moment. Then she said, How do you know that? Ethan said, Because it is how I would have done it. There was a silence after that, the kind that follows a sentence that rearranges the room. Velis turned to her team. Find the recordings, she said. I stood beside my husband in the east corridor of my palace, in the middle of the night, while his shoes dangled from his hand, and my security team swept a courtyard full of Keth operatives that he had personally and methodically neutralized in under 4 minutes. And I looked at him, really looked at him, in a way that I had been carefully not doing for 2 months because I had suspected that if I looked too clearly, I would not be able to pretend I did not see it. He was watching the security team work. His face was calm. His breathing was even. His entire body had returned to the particular relaxed readiness that I had always assumed was just his natural ease, that quality he had that made him seem comfortable everywhere, comfortable in the receiving hall, comfortable in the garden, comfortable at a formal dinner with 40 conclave dignitaries. It was not ease. It was control, the most complete, the most thoroughly practiced control I had ever seen in a living person. He had made it look so much like comfort that I had believed it, because I had wanted to, and because he was very good at what he did, and what he had chosen to do was make me feel safe. I reached out and took his free hand. He looked down at it, then up at me. Tomorrow, I said, you are going to tell me everything. He was quiet for one beat. Then, yes, he said, I am. We stood there in the corridor until the sweep was complete, our hands joined, and outside the narrow palace windows the third moon was high and silver over the garden, and in the courtyard below, 11 people who had come to do harm lay quietly on the stones between the plants that my husband had tended every morning, with bare hands and genuine care. I thought about the way he had said it as how I would have done it. I thought about it for a long time. He made tea. He always made tea when something important was about to happen, and I had learned this about him. The tea was not delay. It was not avoidance. It was the way he organized himself, the deliberate small actions of a man who had learned that clarity came from controlled routine, that the mind settled when the hands had something honest and simple to do. I sat at the table in our main room and waited. He set the cups down. He sat. He looked at me across the narrow table, this table, where we had eaten breakfast every morning for 2 months, where we had argued about the best way to season food, where he had once made me laugh so hard at a story about his first diplomatic briefing that I knocked over my own cup, and he said, I am going to tell you things that most people in the conclave are never supposed to know. I need you to understand that I am not telling you because I was asked to, or because I was ordered to, or because you are the first princess, and this falls under some kind of disclosure obligation. Then why? I asked. Because you are my wife, he said. And because you watched last night, and you deserve the truth of what you watched. I nodded. I wrapped my hands around my cup. I waited. He started at the beginning, not the very beginning, not his childhood or his family or the colonial settlement where he had grown up, though those things came later, in pieces, when the larger shape of what he was telling me needed grounding. He started at the beginning of the part that mattered to the present. When Earth made first contact with the conclave, he said, we were not ready. Not politically, not militarily, not psychologically. You know the public version of that history. The contact decade, the negotiations, the eventual treaty. What the public record does not contain is the part that happened in between the official events. The part that made sure the official events could happen at all. He paused. He turned his cup slowly in his hands, not nervous, just precise. First contact was not clean, he said. There were incidents, misunderstandings that became confrontations. Situations where communication had failed and the only thing standing between Earth and a very serious problem was someone who could operate in the space between the breakdown and the point of no return. A soldier, I said. He shook his head slightly. Not exactly. Soldiers operate on orders, within defined structures, under authority that is visible and accountable. What I did was not always visible, and was never fully accountable until after the fact, if at all. He looked at me directly. I was part of a small group that Earth's government created in the 3rd year of the contact decade. We did not have an official name. We had a designation, internally. Tier 0. We were used when there was no other option, and when the cost of failure was too large to accept. I said, "What kind of situations?" "The kind that do not appear in history books," he said. "A mining station in the Bellary system, where a misidentified cargo ship nearly started a war between Earth and the Delhari, before the Delhari were even full conclave members. A communications relay in the outer ring that the Keth had used to feed false intelligence to 3 different species simultaneously, pushing them toward conflict with each other and with Earth. A colony ship that had been intercepted and redirected by parties who wanted to use the passengers as political leverage during the early treaty negotiations." He said these things calmly and evenly, the way you describe the work you did for 11 years when you have had a long time to stop feeling the sharp edges of it. But I was watching his hands. They were steady. Everything about him was steady. That was the thing. He had learned to carry all of it without putting it down, and the steadiness was not absence of weight. It was the posture of a man who had been carrying something very heavy for so long that he no longer listed under it. "The Soval system," I said. His hands stilled on the cup. "The letter mentioned it," I said. "What happened there?" He was quiet for a moment. "The Keth had a processing facility," he said, "in the outer ring of the Soval system. It was listed as a resource extraction operation in every official register. It was not a resource extraction operation." He paused. "There were people there. Not workers. People who were being held because they had something the Keth wanted. Information, access codes, biological material that could be used in various ways I will not describe in detail." He looked up at me. "I went in. I brought 3 others with me. We closed the facility." "How many people did you bring out?" I asked. 41, he said. "And how many Keth personnel were at the facility?" He looked at me steadily. "Enough," he said, "that I have not been forgiven for it." I absorbed that. I set it beside everything else I was holding. The letters, the meeting with Callus, last night in the courtyard. I could see the shape of it now, how the pieces fit. The Keth Syndicate had a long memory and a structural hatred for anyone who had cost them significantly. Ethan had cost them the Soval facility, the personnel, and whatever they had been building there. He had been Tier 0 and unreachable for 11 years. Now he was a husband in a palace garden, and they had decided that now was the time. "When you retired," I said, "was it genuine?" He did not hesitate. "Yes," he said. "I had done 11 years. I had done enough. There was nothing left in me that wanted to keep doing it, and I knew that when a person in my role reaches that point, they become a liability. I was no good to anyone if I stayed." He paused. "I wanted a life, Vel, a real one, not operations and contingencies, and being the thing between the problem and the consequence. I wanted mornings. I wanted to grow things. I wanted—" He stopped. He looked at his cup. "You," he said quietly. "Eventually. Someone like you. Someone worth being ordinary for." I sat with that for a long moment. Outside, the morning light was coming through the window at the angle it always came at this hour, falling across the table in a way I had come to associate with the beginning of our day together. The garden was visible beyond the glass. The silver-leafed plants had caught the early light. I said, "The conclave placed you with me." "Yes," he said. "Did they tell you why?" He looked up. "They told me that the first princess of the 6th throne was a strategic asset, that the treaty required a symbolic human presence, and that someone with my particular background would be well suited to the protection requirements. He said it carefully, the way you repeat official language when you want to be precise about it. They did not tell me to fall in love with you, he said. That was not in any briefing. I said, did they know the Keth would come? They suspected, he said. My presence here was partly intended to draw the Keth's attention, to give them a known target, in a controlled environment, where we could monitor their approach, rather than wait for them to find another angle. He met my eyes. I was not told this directly. I worked it out. A silence fell between us. Not a bad one. The kind that falls when a great deal of truth has just moved through a room and both people in it need a moment to let it settle. I said, were you told to fall in love with me? Or did you arrive here expecting to do a job and find something else instead? He was quiet for a beat. Then, I arrived expecting to do a job, he said. I found something else instead. And then he looked at me with something that was not managed, not controlled, not the smooth professionalism of a man who spent 11 years keeping his face still. Something genuine, and a little raw, and clearly not chosen, just true. You are the most formidable person I have ever been in the same room with, he said. And I have been in rooms with people who made planets change political allegiance. He paused. Also, he said, you laugh when Bera does the thing with her hands when she is explaining soil density, and that is worth more than I know how to say. Something happened in my chest that I will not describe in this record because it is private. I will only say that it took me a moment before I could speak again. What is Shepherd? I asked, because it had stayed with me since the courtyard. The Keth leader had said it like a name, and a warning, and a history all at once. Ethan looked at the window. It was what they called me, he said. In the field, in my work, the people I worked with, and eventually the people I worked against. Why? He was quiet for a moment. Because I kept people alive, he said. Whatever it cost, whatever it took, I brought them home. He paused. And sometimes, he said, more quietly, what it took was something I could not bring home with me. I understood what he meant. I did not press it. I reached across the table and put my hand over his. He turned his hand over and held it, not tightly, not with any of the control that he applied to everything else. Just held it, the way people hold things they are afraid of losing. I said, you should have told me earlier. I know, he said. I could have helped. I know that too, he said. I am used to not needing help. It is a habit that has not served me well. I said, you are in my palace, married to the first princess of the conclave. You do not need to handle things alone anymore. That is not what this is. He looked at me for a long time. I let him look. I wanted him to see that I meant it, that this was not comfort offered for the sake of comfort, but a practical statement about the resources available to him if he would simply allow himself to use them. I was not a person who said things she did not mean, and he knew that, because he had been paying very close attention for 2 months. All right, he said, at last. All right, I agreed. We sat there with our hands joined and our tea cooling, and the morning light moving across the table, and I went through everything I now knew and began the work of deciding what came next. Because there was a Keth network in the outer ring that had sent 12 operatives to my palace, and would send more once they understood that the first 12 had failed. There was a man sitting across from me who had spent 11 years being the thing that stopped situations from becoming catastrophes, and who had retired to a garden and a marriage. There was a conclave political structure that had placed both of us in this position without full disclosure to either party. And there was me, first princess of the 6th throne, heir to 400 years of rule, commander of one of the largest intelligence services in known space. The Keth had sent people after my husband. They had put letters under my door. They had accessed my private archive. They had sent 12 operatives into my courtyard. I had been very patient. I had been watching, and waiting, and collecting information. I was done waiting. Ethan, I said. He looked at me. Tell me everything you know about the Keth Syndicate's current outer ring operations, I said. Everything. Every name, every location, every connection. I want all of it. He looked at me for a moment, and I saw it. The thing behind the calm, the thing I had glimpsed in the courtyard. The cold professional depth of a man who had spent 11 years being very effective at a very specific kind of work. It surfaced briefly, measured me, and then it did something I had not seen it do before. It relaxed. "That," he said, "is going to take a while." "We have time," I said. Outside the window, the garden moved in the morning breeze, silver leaves catching light, patient and unhurried, the way my husband had tended them every day since he arrived, carefully, thoroughly, knowing exactly what he was building. I addressed the galactic conclave on the 47th day after the courtyard. The chamber held 300 representatives from 42 member species, plus the observational delegations, the press systems, and the entire senior staff of my own palace. The session had been called as an emergency review of Keth Syndicate activity in the Outer Ring systems, a review I had formally requested with supporting documentation that my intelligence division, working alongside my husband for 17 days straight, had compiled into the most comprehensive picture of Keth operations assembled in 30 years of conclave membership. I stood at the central address position, where the light was brightest and the acoustic design meant that every word carried equally to every corner of the chamber. I wore the full formal robes of the Sixth Throne, the deep blue that my family had worn at every significant address in 400 years. I had spent the night before reviewing what I was going to say. Not the political parts. The political parts I knew by heart. I had spent the night reviewing the opening, because the opening was the part that mattered most, and I wanted every word of it to be exactly right. I said, "I am Velara Tishari, first princess of the conclave. I have held the trust of this body for 9 years. In that time I have addressed this chamber on questions of trade, of territorial boundary, of military cooperation, and of diplomatic alliance. Today I am here for a different reason." I paused. Let the chamber settle. "Today I am here to correct a misunderstanding," I said. "A misunderstanding that has shaped the way certain parties in and around this conclave have operated for the past decade. A misunderstanding that I contributed to, without intention, simply by failing to look clearly at what was in front of me." I waited a beat. "I married a human," I said, "and I believed, for 93 days, that he was harmless." I heard the shift in the chamber. Not sound exactly. The kind of shift that happens when a large group of people adjust their attention simultaneously. "I was wrong," I said, "and the parties who acted on the same assumption have recently discovered the same thing, at some personal cost." The documentation had gone out to every representative 48 hours before the session. Every delegate in this chamber already knew the broad outlines of what I was going to present. What they did not know, what I had not put in the documentation, was the part that came next. The part that was not evidence or political argument. The part that was a message. I said, "For 30 years, the Keth Syndicate has operated in the assumption that it was the most capable, most connected, and most informed network in the Outer Ring. It made itself essential. It made itself difficult to remove. And it did this by exploiting the gaps between species, the places where the conclave's communication was slow, where trust was incomplete, where the unknown edges of space were dark enough for profitable things to happen without observation." I turned slightly, addressing the full arc of the chamber. "What the Syndicate did not account for," I said, "was the particular quality of human patience, of human memory, of the specific kind of person that Earth's early history forged in the Contact Decade, when this conclave was still learning whether humanity was an asset or a threat." I looked at the Keth delegation. They had sent 2 representatives, not Dovin, not Callus, new faces, carefully composed faces. 41 people came home from a Keth facility in the Soval system 11 years ago, I said. 41 people who would otherwise not have. The man responsible for that has been sleeping in my palace for 3 months. He has been growing plants in my garden. He has been fixing my atmospheric regulators and learning the names of my staff and making tea every morning, with the particular care that he applies to everything he considers worth doing carefully. I paused. "He has also," I said, "spent those same 3 months mapping every Keth contact point, communication relay, financial routing structure, and political connection that has ever crossed his path, because he is very good at what he used to do, and he noticed, fairly early on, that certain people were going to come to my palace eventually, and he decided to be ready. The documentation I had sent out covered the Keth Syndicate's operational structure in the outer ring in detail that no conclave body had previously possessed. Names, locations, the financial network that ran through 7 different legitimate trade organizations as cover, the political connections, the 3 conclave member representatives whose cooperation the Keth had purchased over the past decade, the location of the processing facility that had replaced the one in the Soval system, which my intelligence division had confirmed active 42 hours before this session, at which point conclave security forces had moved to contain it. 11 people in this chamber were going to be facing formal conclave review by the end of this session. 4 of them were looking at me right now with the expressions of people who had spent the last 48 hours hoping they had misread their documentation. They had not misread it. I said, the Keth Syndicate's leadership is currently facing 37 separate charges under conclave commercial, territorial, and humanitarian law. The processing facility in the Delhari Outer Ring is under conclave authority, as of 40 hours ago. The 312 people recovered from that facility are receiving care at conclave medical stations. I let that number sit in the room. 312, I said again. Because this did not stop with Soval, it continued. It continued for 11 years, in a different location, under different management, because the conclave did not know where to look, and the Keth were careful, and the people who had the knowledge to find it were, in the estimation of people who should have known better, no longer relevant. I looked at the chamber again. All 300 representatives, 42 species, the full formal authority of a governing body that stretched across a significant portion of inhabited space. My husband, I said, is retired. He is very committed to being retired. He has told me this on multiple occasions, in the sincere and direct way that he says all things, and I believe him. He wants his garden. He wants his mornings. He wants a life that does not involve being the thing between problems and consequences. I waited a beat. He will continue to have that life, I said, because I intend to make it extremely clear to every network, every syndicate, every political faction with interests that might tempt them toward the kind of action the Keth chose, what the calculation actually looks like. What they saw in my courtyard was a man who was retired, solving a problem that came to his door, with the same efficiency that he brings to everything else he does. He was not trying. He was not fully engaged. He was annoyed that his sleep had been interrupted, and he handled it because it needed handling. Several representatives shifted in their seats. The man who spent 11 years being the response when everything else had failed, I said, has chosen a very small life on purpose. He has chosen it because he is genuinely peaceful in nature, which is something I did not understand at first, but which I now believe is the truest thing about him. He is not peaceful because he is without capability. He is peaceful because he has more than enough capability, and he has decided, deliberately and with full knowledge of the alternative, that this is what he wants to be instead. I said, I am asking this chamber to let him be it. My voice was steady. I meant every word of it. The Keth Syndicate looked at a human being tending a garden and decided he was harmless. I said, they sent 12 operatives to my palace because they thought that a man who spent his evenings learning my attendants' names and his mornings repotting things with damaged roots had become something manageable. I paused. They were correcting for the wrong version of him. The version of him that goes into a darkened courtyard alone and solves a 12-person problem in under 4 minutes without a single weapon is not the version they should have been afraid of. A silence in the chamber. Complete, thick, the kind that meant everyone was very still. The version they should have been afraid of, I said, is the one who spent 17 days in my intelligence room with my senior analysts, reconstructing the entire financial and operational network of the most powerful criminal organization in the Outer Ring, from memory, systematically, without ever raising his voice, because they had chosen to threaten something he cared about. I waited another beat. That version, I said, does not need a courtyard. That version needs a desk, and time, and a reason. They gave him the reason. I turned slightly to the left, addressing the formal record system. Let it be entered, I said, that the Velshari Conclave herein acknowledges the full scope of Keth Syndicate operations as documented in the attached record, that the Conclave formally moves to review the membership status of any representative body found to have cooperated with Syndicate activity, that the 312 individuals recovered from the Delhari facility will receive full conclave support in accordance with humanitarian code. I paused. And let it be entered, I said, that the first princess of the sixth throne is not particularly interested in discussing this matter further. The documentation speaks for itself. My intelligence division will coordinate with conclave security on the remaining operational details. I am going home. A small sound moved through the chamber. It took me a moment to identify it. It was something between a laugh and an exhale, the release of tension from 300 people who had been holding themselves very carefully for the duration of my address. I did not smile. I gathered my materials. I turned and walked out of the chamber. My senior advisor Ren fell into step beside me in the outer corridor. She was a deeply composed person who had served 3 members of my family, and who I had never, in 9 years, seen unsettled by anything. She said, "That was a remarkable address, First Princess." I said, "Thank you, Ren." She said, "The part about the version they should have been afraid of." "Yes. I am going to think about that for some time," she said. I said, "So will they." She walked with me to the transport, and then I was alone, and then I was home. The garden was in the early evening light when I came through the east gate. The gate with the new locks, the new camera array, the entirely redesigned security system that Ethan had spent 3 hours reviewing with Commander Veliz 2 weeks ago, pointing out with polite specificity every weakness in the original design, and suggesting corrections that Veliz had implemented without argument, because she was a practical woman, and she knew what she was looking at. He was there, in the garden, as I had known he would be. He had a small container of something, compost probably, the particular mixture he had asked Bera to prepare for the silver-leafed plants that had not been doing well in the east bed. He was working it into the soil around the root base, careful and unhurried, the way he did everything that he had decided was worth doing well. He heard me come through the gate. He looked up. He was wearing the old shirt he always wore in the garden, the one with the paint stain on the left sleeve, from when he had helped repaint the east wall 2 weeks after we married. His hair was slightly too long. His hands were dirty. He looked completely, entirely at ease. He said, "How did it go?" I sat on the low wall beside him, close enough that our shoulders touched. I said, "The Keth representation left the chamber during the recess and has not returned." "That seems right," he said. 3 conclave representatives are currently in formal review proceedings. "That also seems right," he said. "The chamber was very quiet," I said, "for most of it." He nodded. He turned back to the plants. I watched him work for a moment. The silver leaves caught the last of the evening light. He had been tending these particular plants since his 2nd week here. They had not been doing well when he found them. Something wrong with the soil, he had said. Something depleted that needed to be rebuilt slowly, 1 layer at a time. He had been building it back, week by week, patient and consistent, putting back what had been missing for years. They were doing better now. I said, "A journalist from the Outer Ring Press Collective asked if I was afraid, when I learned who you were, what you were." He glanced at me. "I told them no," I said. He waited. "I told them the truth," I said, "that the only thing I was afraid of, after learning the truth about you, was nothing. Because now I understood what you feared, and nothing in this galaxy is patient enough, or capable enough, or motivated enough to outlast that." He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the plants. Then he said, "That is a very kind thing to say." "It is an accurate thing to say," I said. "I do not say things that are only kind." He looked at me. The evening was going soft around us. The low light that my people called the amber hour, when the day is done and the night has not quite started, and everything holds still for a moment, in between. He said, "You are the most remarkable person I have ever met." I said, "I know, you have mentioned this." He laughed. "The real one, the one that came from somewhere unguarded, the first thing I had noticed about him. An eternity ago, in the receiving hall, over scattered flower petals, 6 minutes into the life we were going to build together." I put my head on his shoulder. He stayed still, the way he stayed still for things that mattered, and after a moment he put one dirty-handed arm around me, and we sat there in the garden in the amber hour, not talking, not needing to. I thought about the chamber, about the 300 representatives and the carefully composed faces of the Keth delegation, and the sound that had moved through the room when I finished. I thought about the 312 people coming home from a place they should never have been. I thought about 41 people, 11 years ago, in a system far from here, who had come home because of a man who was currently getting compost on my formal robes and did not seem to notice. I thought about what Wren had said in the corridor, the version they should have been afraid of. She was right that it was worth thinking about. But what I thought about, sitting in the garden with the silver leaves moving softly in the evening air, was the version I knew. The one who made tea in the morning and fixed broken things and laughed at flower arrangements and learned the names of everyone around him and built trust with the same slow patience he brought to depleted soil. That version had been here all along. Both of them had. The man who went into the dark and the man who came home to the garden. They were not separate. They were not in conflict. They were the same person, making the same choice, in every situation he entered, whatever the cost, bring people home. He had brought 41 people home from Soval. He had brought me something else, which I was still learning how to name. Something that had to do with the feeling of having someone in my life who stood slightly between me and the door without knowing he was doing it, who fixed broken things because he thought they were worth fixing, who looked at a damaged garden bed and saw not what was wrong but what could be rebuilt. The amber hour deepened into evening. The lights of the palace came on behind us. Somewhere inside, Bera was finishing her duties and Commander Velis was reviewing the new security rotation, and Wren was writing her assessment of today's conclave session in the precise and comprehensive way she wrote everything. The world of the palace was moving through its evening, and my husband and I were sitting in the garden, and it was quiet, and it was exactly what we both wanted. He said, "The east bed is going to need another treatment before the dry season." I said, "Then it will get one." He said, "The silver-leafed ones, they are doing better." I looked at them. They were. The leaves were fuller than they had been. The color was deeper, that particular metallic sheen that meant the plant was getting what it needed. "You have been patient with them," I said. "Some things take time," he said. "You cannot hurry a plant. You just do the right things, consistently, and you wait." I looked at him. He was looking at the plants, but he was also saying something else, and we both knew it, and neither of us needed to say so. I said, "I should go inside and review the session documentation." "You should," he said. "I will not, yet." "No," he agreed. "I did not think you would." We stayed in the garden as the sky shifted from amber to the deep blue that my people called the first dark, the color that appeared between the end of day and the arrival of the stars. The silver leaves caught what remained of the light and held it, the way certain things hold what they are given, and return it slowly, over time. Above us, the stars were coming out. Around us, the garden was quiet. And somewhere in the outer ring, what remained of the Keth Syndicate was having a very difficult conversation about what they had miscalculated, and how, and whether they were going to make the same mistake again. I already knew the answer they would arrive at. I had married the reason.